One of the things that we're finding in a lot of our work is that many park systems, and yours is one of them, where assets have been built over the last 15 years are now deteriorating and need help. They need some TLC. And so an asset management plan, as with all of your municipal assets, is required. And based on that, look especially at aging bridges and stairs and replace those aging park furnishings throughout the park system. You need to conduct some research to identify priority toilet installation locations. You'll recall that was something that was brought up as a priority. That requires some further research before you just launch into it. And you need to develop and adopt a parks bylaw to manage permitted use in BIM parks. Now I know you've got a parks bylaw, but it's not as nearly as fulsome as it needs to be. And especially as you're bringing on things like your subdivision bylaw, the parks bylaw needs to sync with the subdivision and your other bylaws as well. So we also think you need to develop maintenance standards and increase maintenance budgets for some existing community, neighborhood, and waterfront parks. And we have a recommendation specifically around that in terms of numbers a little later on. We think it's important that you pursue an environmental management plan for Bowen Island. So at this point, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to just say that this plan is primarily a parks plan that makes recommendations around environment. It makes recommendations around assets. It makes recommendations around trails, as you'll see in a moment, but it is not an environment plan, an asset plan, or a trails plan. So we fully admit and say right up front that there are holes in all of those areas within this plan. It's an overall master plan for the future. It does not drill down as deeply as some might expect into some of those areas. Supporting community events is key, and we think that a plan, especially for Veterans Park, is warranted to accommodate multiple users that look forward over the next 10 years for what those users might be, and considers the watershed and wetland health in any future development in this area. We think that ongoing collaboration with the province and the community to explore the feasibility of low-impact walk-in, kayak-in only campground on Crown land is worthy of consideration. And it's interesting because this idea came up as much through the youth in the community as it did elsewhere. So in this room we had a couple great sessions with youth, and this was something that arose during those conversations. We think that you need to develop a park naming policy and work with the community to name unnamed municipal parks, trails, and beaches. And that you install and really look at key park amenities such as entries, signage, maps, and beach signage at all your municipal parks, consistent with your recently adopted branding strategy. So then, again with the caveat, Mr. Mayor, that trails are addressed, but not as thoroughly explored as some might like. And so one of our key recommendations is that a full-blown Islands Trails plan be brought to the community for their involvement, consideration, and development. And that enhancing accessibility for seniors and those with not only limited mobility, but all forms of throughout the range of abilities be considered, and that you should also be working with Metro Vancouver, the province, and private landowners to establish encroachment agreements, easement, and rights of way to improve trail connectivity across the island. And this is going to be hard to read from the back of the room, but what we've done here is inventory all the trails that we could get on the map within the time available, and then show some connections. And so in the light brown dotted lines represent connection between communities, between existing trails, and the darker black lines represent those that exist already, and the very light finer lines are those on Crown lands. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I think sufficient to say that there was a lot of interest during the open houses in our engagement around trails, and if I was to pick one priority project for next year, it would be the Trails Master Plan in order to flesh this out much more thoroughly. Although the symbol we're using is a dashed line, it implies an alignment that is appropriate. Really what we should probably be showing is big fat arrows that basically point together, because the precise alignment of these, whether they cross private property or not, of course that's what we want to avoid. There's lots of different ways this could be sliced.
I just wanted to add to, because of all the plans that are happening simultaneously, we have consulted with staff, has consulted with other staff involved with the integrated transportation plan. And so there's consistency in these desired linkages, they're conceptual desired linkages with the integrated transportation plan and this conceptual map.
Right. Thanks for that, Wyatt. It's really important to understand. Moving on to beaches, we have suggested a change in your beach classification system. As you may recall, it was level A, B, C, and we've broken that now down into additional categories, which will help with the management of those areas. We think it's important to identify key beaches and coastal access points that need improvement, ensuring that all of Bowen Island's coast is considered through that process. We think that developing and adopting a shoreline management plan is an important part of your work in the coming years, typically part of the environmental management plan. And consider amenities to amending the dog control bylaw to extend the season that dogs are not allowed on community beaches from June 1st to September 31st. We also believe that it's warranted to enhance access for non-motorized vessels launching at community beaches. And so this is all the little dots along the shoreline represent all the different beach access points, and to switch over now to the new classification system, which has within the report, written body of the report, the appropriate amenities associated with the beach access points, and really the big ones are the community beaches, which in the past there were 3 and now there's 5, right? 4. So there's one more community beach, and so it's not a huge shift in the approach that you've been taking to beaches over the years, but it codifies it, and I think is much more readily understandable.
Just to clarify, the 4th that we're proposing to become a community beach in the plan is Puddle Beach at CRC. Just sort of the criteria there is that there is accessibility, fair accessibility, there's a toilet there, there is parking. So it just sort of fits. And I remember being out there in February at Family Day, and there were probably 40 people there. So it's a very heavily used beach.
Around acquisition, we believe that there is merit in updating the development cost charges bylaw, even though you're not going to see a huge amount of revenue through that. Every dollar counts, and so the DCCs need to be adjusted and the bylaw updated with respect to parks. We think it's important to ensure that all parkland acquired through the development process follows the parkland acquisition criteria outlined in the report. This is key because we think you should really be focusing on lands that have some utility, either for human ecology or natural ecology, and you're not simply inheriting steep slope lands that do not meet either of those criteria. So those criteria are outlined in the report. We think it's important that you strike a working group to develop an acquisition strategy to identify and prioritize opportunities to acquire parkland and trail connections. and develop a coastal access acquisition strategy that prioritizes the acquisition of coastal access points, especially during the subdivision and rezoning process. We think it's really important that you continue to work with private landowners to protect natural areas and establish trail rights of way and easements where trail linkages are desired. It's really important to emphasize that that partnership, not only with a government to government, but with private landowners is absolutely central on the acquisition side. We went through a process during just about all of our various engagements where we're asking people, where are the special places in Bowen? Where are those places that you really feel that the world comes together and that's where you'd like to be outdoors? And so this is a really interesting map that I think will serve council well into the future as opportunities arise potentially for acquisition, for trail development, for protection in some manner or another. And of course, it's good to see that a good many of these special places are already on lands that are protected. So that was really nice. This is the section that Bonnie was referring to around natural capital. We think it's important to complete an analysis of Bowen Island's ecosystem services in keeping with the environmental management plan. And to identify, protect, and enhance critical natural assets by designating areas where land disturbance is minimized at the present time. And to create effective public communications and outreach to educate residents about ecosystem services on Bowen and promote environmental stewardship and conservation. We had, and I think those that participated would agree that the connection with the Squamish in this instance was very good. And I'm not going to embarrass myself or the Squamish by trying to pronounce their name because I'm embarrassed to say I don't know how to pronounce that properly. Does anyone in the room, can anyone in the room say that? Okay, so I'm not the only one. Knowing we are on their unceded territory, I feel obliged to learn more about how to pronounce their language, and at least with respect to place names. But there is a real strong willingness to partner on research and public education to uncover more detailed information about Aboriginal history on Bowen. And to establish where relevant information can be incorporated into the parks and trails here. We think that including Aboriginal reference in interpretive signage is important, and to designate a proposed route for a cross-island pedestrian and biking trail as the Bowen Island Spirit Trail, which is a wonderful connection for the whole North Shore Spirit Trail. And to begin a process of naming key sites of significance for Aboriginal people, which isn't to say that every single park on the island must have an Aboriginal name, but beginning that process of determining, and that's what the naming policy would be about, is the extent to which Squamish names would be incorporated. Stewardship and partnerships are fundamental for any communities, but most especially Bowen. It's important then to create, we feel that it's important to create a part-time volunteer and outreach coordinator position to organize and support ongoing volunteer initiatives related to parks, environment, and community events. There's ample evidence to show that kind of investment pays big dividends over time, not only both in social improvement, but in real dollar equivalents. So we put that forward for your consideration. We think it's important to work closely with the Bowen Island Schools and School District 45 to provide opportunities for outdoor recreation and educational programs, and to continue your work with Metro Vancouver to develop a joint use agreement for Crippen, in particular to formalize community use of the baseball field. But there's lots of other reasons why that joint use agreement would be beneficial. So Mr. Mayor, members of council, I think it's our pleasure to show you this graph in that there is significant public support for these draft goals that was received during the second online survey. Where we didn't receive quite as much support around the goals, goal 6 around Aboriginal culture and around stewardship and partnerships, we've actually adjusted that language in the draft that you see before you. So up to you, of course, to decide whether we've met that bar or not, but we did take that feedback to heart and have done our best to accommodate it. So the implementation plan identifies 24 high priority recommendations. Generally speaking, the estimated time frames are stretched out in increments over the next 10 years, and some will be ongoing after that. And we've also identified estimated planning, capital, and operational costs here. So as Bonnie was saying, the extended out over the full 10-year period, there's about $160,000 a year in costs averaged out over that time. But I think it's also important to emphasize that master plans are not a commitment to spend. They are a strategy, they're a path forward, they're a guidance tool, and that hopefully once the master plan is integrated and synchronized with the official community plan, the next step then is during your annual budgeting process where you look at your capital costs and your ongoing operational costs and refer back to these estimates. These are what we refer to as recommended budget allowances. So as you might imagine, with such a high level plan as this, we don't have detailed design information, we don't have detailed engineering information, we don't really even know, in many cases, the specifics of how the community expects these ideas to be implemented. So there's a lot of work that has to go into that, and that's what's in the first column under planning costs. A large part of those costs are associated with community engagement. The second column around minor capital costs is really an estimate of, or I should say, a recommended budget allowance for the sum of all the different recommendations that we're saying that would result in on-the-ground changes, or to a certain extent, some consultant or staff time to help you, for example, get a parks bylaw or a trails plan going. Although no, actually those would be under the planning costs. And then there's some major capital costs as well. And I think a reasonable modicum for operational costs on an annual basis. So not all of these would be implemented right away, so it's very scalable. Some might occur more in 1 year or another, but on average, the total per year would be about $55,000, which we think is a reasonable recommended budget allowance given the passion and enthusiasm and frankly concern about the park system that we heard during the engagement process. And this breaks it down here a little bit more. In the first couple of years, planning costs of $64,000, capital costs of $148,000, and then scaling up and down a little bit over the next 8 years after that. And so from a tax-based funding standpoint, what you'd be interested in is the operational costs in that far right-hand corner, far right-hand column. That's how we see the annual costs slowly increasing over time. So, Bunny, you want to read this one?
Sure.
Is
So
this your motion?
there's two recommendations included in the covering report and included in the presentation. The first is that the Committee of the Whole recommend that Council adopt the Parks Plan as attached to the October 16th, 2017 report prepared by the Manager of Parks and Environment, and that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council that the Parks Plan be referred to the Parks, Trails and Greenways Advisory Committee and the Manager of Parks and Environment for development of an annual implementation plan to be brought forward to Council at a future date.
Okay.
So, questions, ideas, thoughts?
So the one thing, it says you're not receiving comments from,
Oh, definitely. So the purpose of today's meeting is to obtain feedback.
okay, we can't,
Yes.
and
Yes.
there's still an opportunity for you to receive and incorporate feedback?
Yes.
Not that I have,
Yes.
but,
Definitely, because I think that moving forward is, that's what I'm looking for today, is some feedback. And, you know, I know there's typos, already the working group has sent me some really good feedback. I've got this folder happening here, and so then, you know, prior to the report coming back to council at an open meeting, feedback will be incorporated, and typos and everything of the sort.
I'll continue on then, maybe. So reading through, I was really pleasantly surprised to see the natural capital part and the Aboriginal culture section in there. I was really pleased to see that, so I'm really glad that was put in there. Really pleased with the park and beach classifications and the asset management, so I thought those were really great components of it. My comments were when I saw the multi-use sports court, I was wondering if that also could be referred to the community center steering committee, because maybe that could something that we could look at when we're looking at the community center, or at least at that, because I know that's something that's come up in context. So I think grants are going to play a really important part in accomplishing this and making some of it. So I think we all have a job to keep our eyes out, especially maybe. And I'd like to hear a bit more about maybe how Bowen, the Recreation Community Services Commission can play a part in this as well, because I think there's some overlapping areas, and I didn't see them mentioned in any of the partnership, but I think. And the other thing that I came to mind, I was really amazed at how many beach access points and parks that I was not aware of, and I think there's a great opportunity to promote that and how we can, as residents, explore some of these parts of the island. So, I'd love to see like a map coming out of this, you know, that would help us, you know, find these parts and, you know, encourage families to go out there and find these places. Because, yeah, I thought that was amazing. That just how many parts that I haven't explored. So I thought, and I'm going to confess, I started preparing for council yesterday at 8. My
AM or
PM?
PM?
In the morning, and by about 12, my butt had gone numb, and I thought, I have to go out for a run. I had to get out. And I kind of thought, you know, I always end up doing the same circuit around Killarney. And I just suddenly realized, like, after reading this master plan, there's nothing really about physical activity like this, and I don't ever really go and do physical exercise on our community lands. I think, you know, that's something that could be explored, and you really see that come out of it.
Headwaters Park.
Fair enough, yeah, but maybe that's something that could be pulled out. I didn't, because that was something I didn't come across. And I know there was some mention about dogs on beaches, and I really support the idea of maybe incorporating June in July for the main ones. But something I just wanted to mention is the more stringent you are on the main beaches, it then spills over onto the other beaches. And you can, you know, by the time you get 4 or 5 dogs on something like Alder Cove, it can get really, but I also feel dog owners need a way to be able to go out and enjoy those beaches. So I don't know if we could do a pilot project or something about just maybe like allowing beaches to be off leash for in the early morning. Like I think it's something that needs to be explored a bit, of getting that balance right. It's come to mind because my daughter was injured twice last summer with dogs, and I just think there's got to be a balance, especially like on those Sunday afternoons when it's so hot and everybody wants to be on the beach. Like, just how can we balance that out? So that's my only worry about expanding it to the main beaches, is that it then just, you know, drives up pressure on the smaller beaches. So how do we mitigate that? So yeah, so those are my comments in a nutshell. But overall, I thought it was awesome.
Yeah.
I look forward to being implemented. I think it's great.
Thank you, Melanie.
Maureen, thanks for coming.
I also think it's awesome. And I'll just go through the list of points quickly here. I'm assuming that the roughly $160K a year over 10 years is in addition to the current budget. There in a couple of spots in the report at the very beginning, I was looking for one really important figure at the beginning of this, which was what percentage of the land base of Bowen Island is municipal parkland and what percentage of Bowen Island is green space. And the information is there, but it's in 3 different spots, and I think it needs to be consolidated and put into the introduction. So it's right up front, and you get the big picture. There are references to the bike park in a couple of spots, and the reference is Lot 2 community lands. And in all of the maps, the back end of Lot 2 of the community lands, which is zoned park, is green. And there's sort of an equivalence being made between the bike park and the back end of Lot 2 of the community lands. And that could potentially be misinterpreted because the bike park itself is only half an acre of the 5.5 acres that are shown there. And I think there may be a little bit of a risk in the public beginning to think of that whole area as park when it, at the moment, is intended as land bank. So I'm not sure how you solve that problem, but there's a problem there from my perspective when it comes to the map. The census data is sometimes 2011 and 2016. It would be great if you could consistently use the 2016 data. The categories, the environmental area as a label for a park doesn't work for me. It isn't meaningful. They're all environmental areas, whereas what you're getting at is that they're either protected or they are sensitive or they're something else. But the label doesn't work. It doesn't communicate to me in the same way that the other labels for the park types communicates. You investigate the possibility of a number of named trails. You know, I think there are about 5 of them or so. And in one of the other parts of the recommendations, you talk about connections between Crippen and Mount Gardner. I think that you should be investigating the possibility of trail development between Crippen and Mount Gardner. I think that, personally, that would be one of the most important trail developments in the island, and at the moment you're not talking about that at the same level of priority as the other trails. There's a mention in passing of park area not to include municipal infrastructure, and a little flag came up at that point when it comes to the proposed rezoning at Grafton Lake, where there's the potential for a nature preserve and the siting of the Cote Bay Water Treatment Plant there. So there would be municipal infrastructure within the nature preserve. So you might just want to tease the language a little bit there. When it comes to acquisition, you propose some criteria, and I think what you've done is good, but I think in the long run you'll need to go a little bit farther. And one spot that you might go is to take a look at what Metro Vancouver is using as their interim land acquisition criteria. And one of the really important criteria that they use is the implications if the land is not purchased. What would happen if that land did not become parkland? And in some instances, nothing would happen. There's no development threat. It would just sit there. People would use it anyway. So being able to identify the potential consequences of doing nothing when it came to a particular piece of land that was being considered for land acquisition, I think would be helpful. Metro also has developed a ranking system where certain criteria are worth so many points, you get so many points, and then there's a total, and it enables comparison between different pieces of land that might potentially be acquired. One more thing, I think, no, a couple more. 4.1.4, the tail end of that discourages cash in lieu, and I don't understand what the rationale is for that. We have a lot of park pieces across the island, and we have a significant potential budget commitment needing to be made to work with those pieces of land, to maintain them, to develop them, and so on. Why wouldn't we encourage cash in lieu, or why wouldn't we accept cash in lieu in some circumstances? The rationale for that isn't there, and if there isn't a rationale, I think it should be removed. On page 64 of the document, there's a reference to logging on Bowen, and it needs to be reworded. It says it's important to work with the province to ensure that logging on Crown lands does not deleteriously impact Bowen's finite water resources. I would like that to read something like, it is important to work with the province to ensure that industrial scale logging does not occur on Crown land, impacting Bowen's finite water resources. And just be blunt about that, because there's a door that's being left open here in our parks plan that I want to see, happening there.
Since then, the mayor has written letters.
Yeah. And I guess there is one final point. Just the preference is Aboriginal, First Nations, or Indigenous preferred, and I assume you would have checked that with the Squamish Nation, or could check that as to their preference. And as I said, where I started out, it's awesome work. Thank you very, very much for all the effort that's gone into this.
Thanks for your feedback.
Thanks, Maureen.
Well, let me start what I'm going to say, because there's a bit of a sting at the tail, but just to say thank you so much. This is you presented in a few minutes, relatively, what is a vast amount of work. And I can't tell you how valuable that is to get that amount of work in one document. It's a tremendous resource, absolutely tremendous resource, because I think Melanie said, I just didn't write how many beaches we've got. I don't think we do. It's not until it's put on the plan do we see that. And in the spirit of that, I would encourage any preface or executive overview that you could put in. The point was made, I couldn't recite just how much of our land is Crown land and the other divisions. It would be very helpful. Maybe the numbers slip from our memories, but it would, to have that in this document as an opener would be really, really valuable. On the feeling that pictures speak 1,000 words, the maps are just great. I mean, the editorial is wonderful. But for those who are falling asleep at whatever time last night we were preparing for those meetings, please believe me, maps are so helpful. That visual impersonation. Not all of us have the remarkable ability to assimilate and memorize, to repeat tomorrow thousands of words. So, but the maps are just great. The numbers. I see the numbers, and I understand numbers very well. I wasn't quite sure, and maybe this is a wrong document, just how they were all put together, what was the rationale for those, and I presume that must be dealt with elsewhere, but you're saying it is additional to the existing budget. And I think that is something we're going to have to look at length, because an acquisition cost may well be treated differently to a maintenance cost or any other cost. There are many ways of doing it. If we're to support you, I think the greater understanding of how that has come to pass will be beneficial, because these numbers are large. And if we say that's the way we're going to go, and we're going to be the people who are going to try and work with you on this and make this not only happen, but also palatable and communicable to, because not everybody is going to be on site and spending this amount of money. I mean, the people in this room are the choir. And we all know about the choir because they sing from the same
Song sheet.
and so therefore the song sheet is well rehearsed and it's going to be done in unison, I think, by people in this room. So anything that we can do to look at this, because these numbers are very large, And I look at some of the recommendations, and if we're to be really responsible to the whole community, we have to understand this before saying, yes, we want to adopt this, we want to do this. We really got to know what we're talking about. So as someone who wants to be on site, help us here, please, get a handle on all these numbers.
Can I just want to just response to that? I think it's been smart, though, that the natural capital and asset management part was brought into this plan, because if we look at where funding is coming from the provincial and the federal government, if we can link it to that sort of stuff, then it really opens up the door for much more for funding. So that's why I said, grants are going to be really important, because these numbers are big. But I think it's being a bit strategic that some of these buzzword keywords that upper levels of government, other governments are using, are in here, so that we can hopefully, make use of that. So
It's true, but like any large report, in the end, people go to the bottom right-hand corner. and I agree. I think you are 100% right. I'm just saying, let's have the tools to do this job, and not that they're not there. But this is a large report, and we've assimilated this today. And this is a big cake to digest, unless we cut it up into relatively small slices.
Mr. Mayor, if I might just add to that, because I think you're absolutely right, Councillor. But this is ostensibly a 10-year plan. It'll probably be, let's face it, a much longer year than that. And not every recommendation is going to actually proof out to be viable, proof out to have community support. And so our job on your behalf is to come up with an estimate of, if everything were to be built tomorrow, this is the kind of budget allowance, not a cost estimate so much as a budget allowance that we're recommending. So I think what I'm hearing from what you're saying, Councillor, is that we need to just flesh this out a little bit more to make everything that we've heard and I've said a bit more obvious.
And even some more discussion amongst us a little bit, so that we really do have a grasp, because a 10-year commitment to this type of project is, you need certainty to move forward, and that is